This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to do something a little bit different. Now, typically, we interview authors who already have published their work, but today's guest, Vanessa David, is in that in-between stage between writing a manuscript and publication. So here today to talk about that and so much more is Vanessa David. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, happy to have you here, Vanessa. I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
I actually had a theater career for over 2 decades. And about halfway through that, I was just an actor. And halfway through, I got this crazy idea that I was going to take control of my theater career by becoming a playwright. And if you know anything about the theater, you know that didn't really work out. So yeah, I started writing short plays, and probably the first 5 of them were just absolutely god-awful. And eventually I sort of mastered the art of the 10-minute play, and I have quite a few 10-minute plays that are published and were performed all over the country, some in England. And so that was the beginning of it for me.
Okay, and just kind of keep us back in time a little bit. When you said you were acting, where were you acting? Kind of what are the things? It sounds like you were more on the stage, but can you tell me more about what kind of drew you to acting and what some of the things you did were?
I did theater almost my whole life. My mother always told me that I had to be famous. So I started theater at a very young age doing community theater in Stamford. And then I went to college for theater, and then I ended up doing a lot of musicals. I did a Yoko Ono musical, and you haven't lived until you've been in a Yoko Ono musical. It was called
Was there a lot of
Hiroshima.
Screaming?
A little bit, yes. It was about Hiroshima and the bomb. So we actually ended up on Saturday Night Live as a joke. They said Hiroshima bombed, and I did some children's theater in Bridgeport with the Downtown Cabaret Theater. I worked with them for like 10 years, and I did the Christmas show at the Spinning Wheel Inn for like 7 years. So I did a lot of stuff. I did a lot of, piecing acting work together. But while you're doing that, you're having to have a survival job. So I did cake decorating. I worked at a frozen yogurt shop for decades more than I would like to admit. I ended up working as a server. So I sort of had this dual career going between entertainment and food.
Was it TCBY in Stamford by any chance?
It was at the mall. I worked at the mall. I worked at TCBY in Darien, and I worked at TCBY on High Ridge Road. I worked at them all. Yeah. I like to say if you celebrated a birthday between 1993 and 2008, I probably made your birthday cake.
I am sure that I have seen you there because my mother used to send me on TCBY runs all the time because it was her favorite thing. But why was it so important for your mother for you to be famous?
That's a good question. My mother grew up in Liverpool during World War II. She and her brother were sent away to the country for a few years during the war. And she ended up escaping Liverpool by becoming a dancer. And she was a dancer in troops, and she, kind of like ice-capades. She rode the elephant in the circus. That was her ticket out of Liverpool. So I think she sort of passed that on to me, is that becoming famous was going to be my ticket to success. It didn't work out.
Wasn't there a big band that came out of Liverpool in maybe the 60s?
Oh, yeah. Something about bugs. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you know, it's the Eagles, maybe. I'm not.
Something like, I think it rhymes with that. Yeah.
Certainly something to do with Yoko Ono, though, from what I
yes,
remember.
Yes.
It kind of brings you full circle a little bit.
There we go. Interview over. All right.
I mean, did you feel a lot of pressure from your mom? I mean, and what did that do for, to you specifically?
I did. I ended up pursuing theater way longer than I should have, I think. I ended up finally quitting, gosh, I don't remember now, 2017. And she had already been dead for 8 years. So even after she was dead, I was really trying to please my mother and become famous in the theater. And, I was good at it, I think. Now I'm not. I tried reading a monologue that I wrote the other day, and I didn't believe a word I said. And it was autobiographical. So, so I've lost whatever it was that I had as an actor. But it's a terrible business. It's very dehumanizing. I went to New York for 7 years auditioning before I booked a job. And just think about all the money I spent on the headshots and the train rides. I really wish I hadn't done it for so long. But hey, here we are.
Here we are. But you kind of pivoted. You started writing your own plays, and
Yes.
admittedly, you mentioned that the first few may not have been prize winners, but you did have some success in getting some plays kind of out there. How did you approach playwriting? How did the ideas come to you? How did you get better at it?
I just kept at it. I joined a writing group in Stratford, Connecticut. And so every time there was like a themed show coming up, I would write something for that theme. And then I would also submit to playwriting competitions all over, and usually they had a theme or like a word. There's something that was like the seed of the idea. And then I just sort of just kept at it and just got better. One of the first performances of one of my plays I went to, I don't even remember what the play was called. I remember it was something about the Ninth Amendment, which, who cares about plays about the Ninth Amendment? But but I thought I was being all, intellectual or whatever. And they did my play and everybody sort of politely clapped. And then they did the next play and people were like really clapping and they were into it. And the lady sitting in front of me turned to the woman next to her and said, "Well, that play I understood." And I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, the audience needs to actually understand what I'm talking about. So it was sort of like a real light bulb moment for me. And I ended up, I think I have 5 or 6 that are published. And, people do them all over the country. And people will email me asking for the rights to do it. And it's so nice to hear, like, high school kids are doing one of my plays, and I let them do it for free because it's important to me that my work is helping to form young actors. And one of my plays is about Alzheimer's. My mother had Alzheimer's. And so when I hear they're doing that play, it's extra important to me.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a legacy of sorts. That work is a legacy of sorts. Long after people may have forgotten, your performances at the Spinning Wheel Inn, but they'll remember the play about Alzheimer's. Maybe not the one about the Ninth Amendment, but
no, please don't.
I couldn't even tell you what the Ninth Amendment is.
I can't right now. Something about states' rights. Compelling.
If Yoko Ono had a gun to my head,
right,
I would not be able to tell you what the Ninth Amendment
No.
is, and threatened to start screaming and singing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so you stopped in 2017. What did you do after that? Where did your sort of day job, your survival job, take you?
So there was a little bit of overlap there. I became a lunch lady, and it was January of 2015 when I started doing that job. And I had gone to culinary school a few years earlier, and so I was, sort of working part-time at this lunch lady thing, sort of trying to rebuild my life after my mother's Alzheimer's, because that really took a lot out of me, emotionally, financially. It was just very draining taking care of her for so long. And there was a little bit of overlap where I was still trying to make the theater work. And I was involved in a workshop in Norwalk, Connecticut. And it was just sucking the life out of me. I was on the board, and I was ending up having to run the theater and run all these fundraisers. And eventually I just burnt out and I couldn't do it anymore. And when I got to that breaking point where I couldn't do the theater anymore, it just released like a weight off of my chest, and I just felt so much better not doing it anymore. And then I sort of focused all my energy into the kitchen and on cooking and making the kids some good food, introducing them to food that's not pizza and not hamburgers. And that was a lot of fun. I worked at the Darien School Lunch Program for 7 years. So first I worked at the high school for 3.5 years, doing all the baking and running the cash register and running myself ragged, for 3.5 hours a day. It's incredibly demanding work. And then I became the manager at one of the local elementary schools, Tokenique Elementary School in Darien.
Now, I'm curious, did your background at TCBY, spur a passion for the food service industry that drew you into it back in 2015?
I think so. I think it wasn't only that. I think I had my own issues with my parents not feeding me lunch when I was in elementary school. So I think that sort of sowed the seeds and this story that I talked about recently on my Instagram page. When I was at Turner River Middle School, I was sitting at one end of the table with all the heavy metal kids, and all the rap kids were sitting at the other end of the table. And one of them threw something at us, and genius me throws a piece of bagel back at them. And so then we're all lining up to go back to the classroom, and I feel a big slap in my eye, and somebody has slapped a barbecue sauce into my eye. And of course, the F-bomb comes flying out of my mouth, and the teacher was shocked, and she sent me back into the kitchen to wash out my eye, and I'm just standing there kind of in shock. And one of the lunch ladies came in and was looking at me into the mirror, and she was just so kind, and so, why did she do that? And I was like, I don't know, and it was just, that was a real defining moment for me. She was one of the first adults that showed that she cared about me, not because it was in her job description, but because she was a human and I was human and I was hurting and she wanted to help me. And so I think back on that moment, and I think that's part of the genesis of what made it possible for me to become a lunch lady, because I want to have that same effect on kids.
So this woman, and this is one of those experiences that I think so many people would just forget and file away, especially, I don't know how many years later, 30 plus years later? It
was on the day of the Challenger thing,
okay.
The explosion. So that's 1986. Yeah.
86, January of 86, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you think about, I couldn't tell you too much about memories I had from school. I was in grammar school at the time in 86, probably 6th grade. But you remembered this. It left an impression on you, which impacted you kind of much later on in life. What was your path? And I know I'm only going to use the term because you've been using it, lunch lady, and I of course have to. You mentioned SNL before. I'm thinking of Adam Sandler and Chris Farley as I say these words. But what was your path to becoming a lunch lady?
I really got into food after my mom died. My husband and I started hosting dinner parties for our friends as a way to sort of rebuild our social life and our shattered existence. And so food became a real healing thing for me, sharing food with others. There's no better feeling than cooking all day and having your friends over to eat dinner, and there's absolute silence because the food is so good. That is just the best feeling. And so that was something that it sort of just ignited in me that I wanted to share this with kids and how important food is. And it's more than just eating pizza every day. There's a real love language to food, and food is also fuel. It's not I don't like to think of food as nutrition. I think of it as fuel, to fuel your body and to make things possible. I'm a hiker, so food really fuels my hikes. It's not about denying myself certain foods. It's about finding the right food to make my body work the way that I want it to.
Yeah, and as you're talking about this and kind of your love of kind of nourishing others, I'm kind of thinking about, this Vanessa from middle school who didn't have. It sounds like you weren't really packing. You weren't having a lunch packed for you.
No.
And it's almost like you're, as a lunch lady, and tell me if I'm smoking crack here, but you're kind of feeding the kids who maybe you're feeding your younger self by doing so during that period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in Darien's a rich district, but we still had kids who didn't have lunch money. There were plenty of kids that I paid for their lunch. And there were kids who were, somewhat food illiterate. You got to teach them new things about food. So yeah, it all came from a place of love.
Talk to me about the book that you're writing, the manuscript that you're working on. What's it about, and what prompted you to start writing it?
So the book is called The Lunch Teacher, and it's actually finished. It took me maybe 6 or 7 weeks to write the first draft, and then I've been working on numerous drafts with an editor. So now I'm on the agent stage of shopping. But it's really about, my whole career at the Darien School Lunch Program and what happened in the end. Unfortunately, with COVID, we also had on top of that, we had outsourcing. So the district decided that we weren't going to be self-operated lunch program anymore, that they were going to get an outside company to come in and run the lunch program. And between the two, I am no longer working there. So don't want to give it all away, but so the book goes back, to those Genesis moments, with the barbecue sauce and with my parents sending me to school with no lunch. And it also sort of follows my career and the strength that I found after my mother passed away and filing the theater career firmly into the past. And I'm very proud of it. It was actually not really hard to write, which which I don't know. I don't know if that's normal, but I was at the point. I was really angry, and so when I had to leave my job, it was very emotional for me. And I think it was sort of like that same moment with the playwriting, where I was trying to take a hold of my career, by writing this book, just like I was trying to take a hold of my career by writing plays.
You mentioned it wasn't all that hard to write. You might, I'd be curious to speak with you again in a year and see how hard it was to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite after it goes through the, after more people start looking at it and providing their feedback on it. But, in terms of lessons to other people, because a lot of the people that listen to this are aspiring authors themselves. And in terms of lessons for other people, and one thing that I can think of is that, I tell authors, there's a story inside you that only you can tell, and you have to find what that story is. Now, this being a memoir is a story that only you can tell, because it's your story, it's your personal story. But the same could be said for fiction as well. I'm curious, as you were kind of going back in time and kind of revisiting these experiences, some of them certainly positive, some of them maybe negative and emotional. Did you learn anything about yourself as you were going through this process?
I did. I actually found it helped me make a connection between the emotional eating that I do now. I finally realized, my parents, they didn't send me to school with food, but at home we were very good with food. My father was Hungarian, my mother was British, and so we always had delicious home-cooked meals for dinner that took me around the globe. And so that on that note, they nailed it. So I think I made sort of a more unhealthy connection between eating and love. And so I find when I'm sitting on the couch at night, emotional eating, it's because I'm trying to feed my soul and not feed my stomach. And somehow writing this book helped me make that connection. And I've gotten much better. I'm not doing as much emotional eating anymore.
Yes, I could say the same about emotional drinking.
I don't drink, thank God.
sitting on my couch in the evening, but not to really make fun of that. But I certainly can relate to what you're saying. There are behaviors around eating, and I grew up in I'm half Italian, half Irish, and my mother was the Italian one, and in the Italian culture, just cooking is an expression of love.
Yes.
And my grandmother, if you weren't eating enough, something was wrong. Something was wrong with you. And to this day, if I go to a friend's house, her mother, another Italian friend of mine, first thing she'll do is sit me down and put food in front of me. And I'm like, I'm not hungry. She's like, nah, you don't know you're hungry, So we're taught, like, culturally that, food is this expression of love. And that's why it is a challenge for many of us when we try and maybe shed a few pounds.
Yes.
To kind of reframe what food is. Now, you mentioned, food being fuel, especially for the kids. And I know we don't want to give too much away from the book, but just reading what I've read about you, and I know there was a big article that Angela Corella did. I think it was the Connecticut Examiner. You kind of, one of your philosophies was that heating things up is not cooking.
No.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, or what can you share about that?
Well, towards the end, once we had outsourced the lunch program, almost everything that I was cooking was out of a box, and it was killing my soul to do that. When I had first taken over as the elementary manager at the school, we were still self-operated, so we had fresh produce and all sorts of fresh ingredients, organic chicken breasts. So I was constantly, if I had a 45-minute section of time, I was figuring out how to make chicken and white bean chili for the teachers in that time, or something. I was constantly trying to, minimize food waste, and I was making soup from scratch for the teachers and for the kids. So I just love doing that. There's nothing better than to give somebody some of your food and to make them happy. And the kids were really into the homemade soup. It's funny that that we were making like roasted cauliflower soup, and they were clamoring for it. So you just have to give them an opportunity, and you have to talk to them. I don't talk to kids like they're children. I just talk to them like they're equals, and I think that earns me a lot of street cred with them, I suppose. And I could get the kids to, almost any kid, to try anything. And stickers. You have to give them stickers sometimes.
Very, very important for the grammar school, elementary school set. Stickers.
Yes.
So we're gonna move on to the hard stuff with regards to writing. And a lot of people tell me that writing is the easy part. The hard part is what happens after you finish that last paragraph. So can you share anything with me about your journey to try and get this in front of agents, and how that's going?
I have sent to over 30 agents so far. I've gotten 8 that haven't replied, and I think I'm up to 10 no's. I got one today in 2 hours and 10 minutes. That might be a record.
That could be a record. That could be a record. And the best is when you start comparing all of the rejection letters and seeing where the similarities are to see if they're using like the same form.
Yes.
Or if they, and I think a win during this process is getting some kind of acknowledgement that they actually did read it, or that they have something constructive to say while they're saying no.
Yes. Yeah. I had a few, like one suggested the titles Made and Nickel and Dimed as, comparative titles, which I thought was very nice of her to make that suggestion. I had 2 agents from one agency read the book, and they both got back and said that, the writing was compelling, but I didn't have enough social media followers. So, and one, thought the writing was, or the story was too localized, which says to me that they don't understand what's going on with school food, because this thing with outsourcing is happening all over the country, and especially post-COVID. There so many school food workers have walked away from the job. They don't get paid enough. There's not enough people. I just read an article in Alaska that they're serving the kids like beef jerky and oranges and not hot food because there's nobody there to prepare it. But are they going to do that for minimum wage anymore? I don't think so. So that's a goal of the book, is I really want to bring all these issues to light, what school food workers face, and I want higher wages for them. I think you can't have improved school food for the kids if you do not improve working conditions for the women and the men who make it happen. I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah. That comment on social media is just such a head scratcher, because here you are, and so many other people have told us to me as well. First time author, don't have a huge following, you haven't established a platform yet, but these agents seem to want people who have established platforms. But how can you establish a big platform or a wide platform before you have something to share kind of en masse? It's like a chicken and egg thing.
It is.
It's maddening. It's maddening. But
Yeah,
it is reality.
I'm trying not to let it get me down. I went through all this rejection with the theater, decades ago. So I'm actually very good at taking the rejection. If you're not the right agent for me, that's great. I don't want you. I want the right agent. I want somebody who's going to believe in my book, going to believe in the power it has to change the industry, and that's who I want. So I'm willing to take all the no's to get to the right yes.
There you go. That's the right attitude to have. Well, I'm going to transition to talking about other things. Number one, I call this Uncorking a Story because we like to get at the stories behind the story, which is our author's story. You today, Vanessa, are our author. So I'm curious to get to know you a little bit more through pop culture. And my first question around those lines would be, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite TV shows, if you had any?
Oh gosh, I consumed television like water. So what stands out to me, Little House on the Prairie. I remember that final episode when they blew up the whole town. That was amazing. And MASH also stands out to me. Oof. I remember watching the last episode of MASH on my black and white television in my bedroom, crying my eyes out.
I remember that too. My grandfather was a field surgeon in World War II, and MASH was one of his favorite shows. So we were, that was what, 83, 82, 83 maybe?
Something like that. Yeah, I still watch it now. It's in reruns now.
Yeah, that's one of those shows that has a lot of humor, but it also has a lot of heart.
Yes.
And they really managed to, take that setting, this wartime setting, and be able to do both with it. I think, it was a great show. And for so many years, it was the number one watched broadcast program ever, the last episode of MASH.
Yeah.
So a great show.
Great show.
Did you watch After MASH, which was, I think, the
I think I might have watched an episode or two, but yeah, that was like the Night Court reboot.
Oh my gosh, I tried.
I lasted 4 minutes.
You lasted longer than I did. I wanted so much to like that because I loved the original show.
Yes.
It was so good. Such a great cast, but and it's not as if the actress who's playing Harry Stone's daughter. She doesn't do a bad job. It's the idea. Maybe it's run its course. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I also find that with network television in general, it's there's not a lot of there. But I digress. What about music? What were you listening to growing up? Sounds like heavy metal.
Yeah, heavy metal. I was actually an Anthrax fan, and I'm going to see them on Friday.
Really?
Yes, they're going to be at the casino. So,
which one? The Mohegan Sun?
Yeah, Mohegan.
Are they going to be at the Wolf Den, or is it?
No, they're in the arena. They're playing with Exodus and Black Label Society.
Holy smokes! Wow. The Toxic Waltz. That brings me back to Jesus.
Yes. No, I was a big Anthrax fan in high school.
Oh, me too. Among the Living. My friend, I'll give him a shout out. Rob Salmonen gave me a cassette of Among the Living, and I'm like, oh, this is not Poison.
Yeah. That was the first song I heard was NFL.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, and I was like, oh, I love them since then. Yeah.
And now it was great. And you mentioned the rap kids on one side of the lunch table and the metal kids on the other, but they really could come together with Anthrax after their collaboration with Public Enemy.
Absolutely.
They were one of the first crossovers to have rap and metal, and to me that changed everything for me. Like, that sound was so interesting and good. I could go down a Anthrax rabbit hole with you right now, but I will, for the sake of the listeners, choose not to do that. And what about books? Were you a big reader back in the day?
I was. When I was younger, I was a V.C. Andrews freak. All the Flowers in the Attic and Heaven series. I read all that stuff. And then when I got into high school, I got into Kurt Vonnegut. My favorite movie was Footloose, and they mentioned Slaughterhouse-Five and Footloose, and so that's how I got into Kurt Vonnegut. I probably read almost every book he ever wrote. I was a huge Vonnegut fan.
Do you remember the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield?
Yes, vaguely, yes.
So there's a scene in that movie where he's got to do a paper on Kurt Vonnegut to pass a class. He hires Kurt Vonnegut to write the paper. and then he wounds up failing it because
and so it goes.
Yeah, it was just so funny. That's my only Kurt Vonnegut story.
That's awesome.
But as we wrap up here, Vanessa, I'm curious if you could go back in time and whisper some words of advice into the younger Vanessa David. The one who's feeling this pressure to become a performer and to become famous, and who's not having enough food to eat at lunch, and who's coming home to watch Little House on the Prairie, and see Pa play the fiddle. What words of advice would you give to the younger Vanessa David?
I always joke about this. I wish I had stayed away from boys. I've wasted so much energy on boys, and I should have spent that time on myself and on my career. But I think that sort of translates, into don't look for outside approval. I think you got to find the love within and make it work, as I'm here trying to desperately find an agent, outside approval. Huh.
Well, I think you just gave us the name to this episode, which is going to be Find the Love Within.
Yeah, there we go. I liked it.
There we go. Well, Vanessa, thank you for stopping by Uncorking Your Story and letting me uncork yours. Please keep us up to date on your path to publication.
Awesome. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.